Democrats have gathered in Chicago from across the country to formally nominate Kamala Harris as their presidential candidate at the Democratic National Convention, which will continue for 4 days until Thursday. This convention is a tradition in presidential election years for both major parties in America. The Republican convention was held in July, where Trump and Senator Vance were confirmed as the party's candidates. During the Democratic convention, Harris will formally accept her nomination on Thursday, August 22, with a speech. This speech will be crucial as many Americans remain unaware of her policy agenda, despite her success in energizing Democratic voters nationwide since Biden's withdrawal. She has raised record funds and made gains in national polls and key battleground state surveys. Harris is also working to unify the divided Democratic Party on issues such as the Gaza war. Thousands of protesters are expected in Chicago during the convention, most of whom oppose the Biden administration's unconditional support for Israel's war in Gaza. A coalition of around 200 social justice organizations is planning to march at the convention today. The march will represent a contingent of historically Democratic voters who have stated they will refuse to vote for the party's nominee unless the White House imposes sanctions on its support for Israel. In a May Ipsos/Reuters survey, 44% of registered Democratic voters disapproved of Biden's handling of the war. Kamala Harris has been more sympathetic towards pro-Palestine activists than Biden, but many protesters don't agree with this view. According to the coalition to march on the DNC, Biden's entire administration, along with high-ranking Democratic officials from across the country, has spent the last 10 months wholeheartedly supporting genocide in Gaza. Some pro-Israel groups are also dissatisfied with Harris's ambiguous stance on the war. Unlike Biden, Harris does not call herself a Zionist and did not participate in the joint session of Congress when Netanyahu addressed it. She did not pick Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, as her running mate. Shapiro is a staunch supporter of Israel, and Harris chose Tim Walz instead of him, a Minnesota governor who did not crack down on pro-Palestine demonstrators on college campuses. However, Harris has also been consistent in her stance that Israel has the right to defend itself despite the mounting death toll from Israel's relentless bombardment in Gaza since October 7.
Israel has a right to defend itself, and how it does so matters. I also expressed with the Prime Minister my serious concern about the scale of human suffering in Gaza, including the death of far too many innocent civilians. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent.
Chicago is home to one of the country's largest Palestinian American communities and is expected to see significant local participation in the marches. At the DNC, speaking slots have been allocated to the families of American hostages held by Hamas in Gaza and Keith Ellison, the progressive Attorney General of Minnesota and one of the most prominent Muslims in national politics. For Democrats, the key question is whether the protesters represent a significant group of voters who could influence the November elections. Issues like inflation, housing costs, abortion, and immigration are more pressing for most Democratic voters in 2024, even young voters, compared to the war in Gaza. New polling data from the University of Chicago and Gen Forward reveals that opinions among voters under 40 are divided. 36% disapprove of the U.S. providing military aid to Israel, 33% support it, and 29% have no opinion. Interestingly, the Gaza war ranks low on the list of concerns for young voters, with issues such as immigration, economic growth, and income inequality taking precedent. However, pro-Palestinian voters hold significant leverage due to their concentration in Michigan, a crucial battleground state. In Democratic primaries, a significant number of voters chose to remain uncommitted, with 101,000 in Michigan and 47,800 in Wisconsin. Biden won these states in 2020 by margins of just 154,000 and 20,600 votes, respectively. Last month, during the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, demonstrators took to the streets to denounce Trump and his running mate for their stances on abortion, the Gaza war, and other issues. The most well-known convention protest occurred at the Democratic National Convention in 1968, also held in Chicago, where demonstrators demanded an end to the Vietnam War. Their attempt to march to the convention site was met with a harsh crackdown by thousands of police officers, leading to chaos within the Democratic Party and contributing to the Republican Richard Nixon's victory in that election. He did not stop the war immediately. Protests rarely work in stopping wars. During his 2008 election campaigns, President Obama pledged that he would end 2 ongoing wars of America in Afghanistan and Iraq, but when he left office after 8 years, U.S. forces were fighting at 3 fronts. He added Syria to that list. From the feminist movement to the civil rights movement, from the Vietnam War to the war in Gaza, Americans always demonstrated against the wrongdoings of the administration in Washington, but rarely did these protests play a decisive role in the outcome of elections or real policy change immediately.